This is the I Read Comic Books podcast, the very best podcast for regular comic book fans. I'm your host, Mike Rapin, and joining me this week, two heroes, just in the nick of time to prevent everything from ending as we know it. This week, I'm joined by Danny from the Next Issue podcast.
Hello, everyone.
And our very special guest for this week's episode, comic book creator and artist, Malachi Ward.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're very excited to talk about comic books with you because honestly, we've been off. The show's been on pause for 4 weeks. I've been going crazy, sitting in my house, just thinking about comics and having no one to talk about it. So it's been a stir crazy month, if not a very eventful one. But nonetheless, we're here to do those things and talk about it. So before we get into all of that, I want to pitch over to you, Malachi. You're a guest on the show. For folks who maybe don't know you, could you tell everybody at home about who you are, what you do, and what you've got going on right now?
Yeah, I'm a writer and artist, and the most recent thing that I've worked on is drawing Black Hammer: The End, which was written by Jeff Lemire, and it's kind of the final story arc of the main Black Hammer story that started back in 2016, and the trade collection of that comes out, I think, on Wednesday.
Yeah. It'll be when this episode is out. So this episode comes out on Wednesday, so you can listen to this episode and then go pick it up at your comic book shop. That's the hope.
Yeah, so that's the most recent thing I do. I like to do a lot of covers too, stuff for like Star Trek mostly. And then I also write and draw my own comics, a lot of times in collaboration with my creative partner, Matt Sheen. So we did a book called Ancestor for Image Comics, and a book called Expansion for Ad House Books. Lots of stuff like that. It was random editorial illustration, things like that. Yeah.
Well, I hope everyone here has seen your work in some capacity, because I've seen some of the covers that you've done and they're absolutely beautiful. And if I feel like if you saw it, you'd recognize it because your art is very distinctive in a very, very good way. But, before we dig into all of that, talking about all the amazing stuff that you've got going on, we're here to talk about comic books. Those are the things that we're here to do for the first half of the show. So I have two legally mandated questions that I ask in every single episode of this show. And that is, how have you been? How have comic books been? So I'm going to kick right back to you, Malachi. What's been up? What kind of comics have you been reading?
I mean, I love to read a wide range of comics, and one that I read pretty recently that I really loved is called Our Bones Dust.
Hell yeah.
Written and drawn by Ben Stenbeck. And it was a 4-issue series that's been collected, so it's very kind of like concise, punchy story. You could read it pretty quickly. But yeah, Stenbeck did a bunch of art for various Mike Mignola comics over the years, and this is him kind of doing his own thing.
Yeah.
And it's this great combo of it. It's kind of a like Mad Max sort of a world, very post-apocalyptic, but he introduces this super advanced, I think probably like a AI, like a robot of some kind that's basically surveying Earth and kind of, doing like archaeology and exploring and stuff like that, tagging, barbaric humans and re-releasing them into the wild and stuff. So this super advanced alien or robot or whatever it is kind of gets caught up in trying to protect this kind of feral little kid that's on the run from like a gang of, cannibals. Yeah. So it's kind of, it has like a kind of that like European science fiction, heavy metal sort of feel to it. It's a little bit like, if you like Simon Roy's comics, that kind of like science fiction. Really, anybody that loves science fiction is going to have a great time reading Our Bones Dust. Yeah.
Yeah, that book rules. I think we were big proponents of that on the show. I think when it first came out, if only because I think Nick had said to me, like somebody pulled Ben Steinbeck was going to, do something that wasn't in the Hellboy universe, and was very, very excited for that. Dave Stewart as well, which is always cool to see. But yeah, that book rules from start to finish, just like pedal to the metal, and it doesn't stop, and it doesn't stop being interesting. I'm glad to see you enjoyed it, if only because like I just want more people to read about it. So.
It's got a great title too. Like once you figure out why it's in that specific syntax, like it's really like the whole world is bananas, but just Yeah, going into that book, I haven't finished it, but I did get into the first couple of issues, and it's such a crazy idea, and I'm like, how is this gonna go going forward? But it's very enjoyable. I'm glad. I'm looking forward to reading it or finishing it now that you've talked about it and brought it back up to my. I get distracted whenever a new shiny comic comes out
Oh yeah.
the next week. So
Oh
And
yeah,
when you read
yeah.
it, like when you read it in trade form too, it's the kind of thing where you're just like, you burn through it so fast because it's yeah, it's a real entertaining read.
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a book that I was happy to have the pause every month, if only because I would have just burned through it, right?
Yeah, and
Which is
it is nice to have breaks because the art is so beautiful and like the designs are so cool. Like the design of the robot guy is like really interesting and kind of not what you're used to
yeah.
seeing. Um, yeah, so it's good to be able to savor that artwork and stuff.
Exactly, exactly. Well, Danny, let's bounce over to you. How have comic books been? How have you been? All that stuff.
well, Mike, I've been doing very well, as you may or may not know. This is one of the big weekend holidays for me. San
Did
Diego
something
Comic.
happen this
Yeah,
past weekend, or I don't know what was going on?
something something has been happening for like the past 4 days. There has not been one day where I don't like look down at my phone and I'm like, oh, look at that, just another
Yeah,
surprise, or like just more news and announcements. So yeah, San Diego Comic Con is wrapping up as we record this episode. Now, although I wasn't able to go, I always keep track of everything that's going on, and specifically on the comic book side. Although, man, oh man, they really announced a lot of cool stuff for the movies.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I've been keeping track of that. I did get a chance to go watch Deadpool and Wolverine. If for anybody watching live on Twitch or on the Patreon, you can see my Wolverine bucket right behind me, my popcorn bucket with the
Yeah.
big gaping mouth, which
You
is
know, you pair that with the Dune bucket. I mean, like Danny, you got a weird world that you're living in. That's all I'll
wait
say.
wait till that alien Romulus bucket comes out, which is like this giant xenomorph head.
Oh man,
Yeah.
that one I might actually have to go to the movie theater for. I'll just say that.
Who would have guessed that that would be the trend that move like get yourself to the theater kind of marketing would actually work for is like we're all going to look back and be like, remember the era of the like
The
vaguely
bucket fever.
disgusting popcorn bucket, novelty popcorn
Right.
buckets that everyone was buying.
Listen, I'm just mad that I didn't go to the theater for the D&D movie so I could get the giant
Oh,
D20 popcorn bucket, right? Like I'm still
that was
kicking
really
myself over
cool.
that. So if I have to settle for like a Dune bucket or a Xenomorph bucket, I guess I'll just take that. That's I'll say.
Yeah, if I had to rank them, the ones I have, I like the D21. With the Barbie movie, they just did a Barbie car. Like it's just the car, the pink
Oh,
car. And then the Dune and the Wolverine are pretty cool. The other funny thing is that I don't really like popcorn at the theater. Like, it gets so I get a giant thing of so they give me a giant thing of popcorn with my bucket, and I usually just try to find like a family that's walking in, and I'm like, I just bought this because of the bucket. Do you guys want this so you don't have to spend like the whatever $10-15
$10, yeah.
for a large bucket of popcorn? So I'm giving back to my community as I go to the movies. So uh,
Oh man.
but comics have also been great. Like I said, we got a bunch of announcements that I'm looking forward to. But this week, I wanted to talk about something that is very interesting to me. I will issue a bit of a content warning. This is a comic book from EC Comics, which is a horror anthology. So there's a lot of content warning that comes along with a big horror anthology. So keep that in mind before you dive into it. But EC Comics finally came back via Oni Press with its first new series in almost 70 years. So EC Comics was shut down in 1956 due to the Comics Code Authority.
Hmm.
And there's a really interesting story behind all that. Like, I don't want to call it a conspiracy, but like, there's the theory that a lot of other publishers wanted to get into the market, so they created the Comic Codes Authority to like, take down EC Comics, which is very popular. But anyways, go check it out. There's a lot of cool stuff on the internet about that. Um, but I wanted to check it out because I like horror stuff, but I only like it in small bites. I'm not a
Hmm.
big horror person, so an anthology just sounded great. So this is a 40-page anthology that features 4 different stories in the horror thriller kind of genre. I only got to read 3 of them, but I really love. It reminds me of like watching like Twilight Zone or Tales from the Crypt, or like even like Are You Afraid of the Dark for us elder millennials out there, like stuff
Sure.
like that, which is like just a little horror story. It's there's no barrier of entry, right? There's nothing you need to know. You don't have to be well versed in 30 years of continuity. This is going to be a 10-page story that might scare the socks off of you. The first story is called Killer Spec by Jonathan Holtham, or by Jay Holtham, sorry, with art by Jorge Fornes. This is a story about a writer who is struggling, and then his roommate just happens to write like the best script he's ever seen. And he wants to know how can he get a hold of that fame, because that's what he really wants. So obviously all these stories have a really kind of fun twist or a messed up twist, depending on who's writing them. There's also the Senator Center story by Chris Condon, who just finished. Oh boy, That Texas Blood. He's been working on that. So I really wanted to check that out. Interestingly enough, this is not a Western story. It's a story about a senator and a reporter who's investigating the senator who kind of changes their mind on a big stance, and the reporter goes in to figure out what's going on, what's been leading to this sudden change of heart. And then the last story that I read is called Family Values by Stephanie Phillips, who's one of my favorite writers. She's currently writing a bunch of stuff at Marvel, as well as the series Grimm from Boom Studios. And it's got art by Phil Hester, who's just like a legend. Like, I love all the stuff that he did over at DC.
Yeah.
This is probably the most messed up story. You see a family in a basement, and a bunch of people just came in with guns into their house, and they're making them choose. One person has to die, and they have to choose who it is, or everyone dies. But of course, like I
Yikes.
said, this is like all kinds of twists and turns. So yeah, very very cool stories. Just keeping you on the edge of your seat. And I think the thing I like the most about a book like this is that these creators only have 10 pages to like give you like a complete thought, and the way they do it, it's different in each case, but it's so cool to see everything kind of come together, and you get to the last page and you're like, well, what now? Or the story kind of wraps up in a very messed up way, or whatever the case may be. So uh very excited for this. They also announced that they're doing a sci-fi anthology called Cruel Universe that's also going to be under the EC Comics imprint. So if you're into anthologies, and before the show started, we were kind of talking about like the return of anthology comics into the mainstream. So this is the perfect time to jump into something like that.
Heck yeah. I've got all these creepy archives that are sitting on my shelf right now, so maybe I should read those before I buy this new one. But nonetheless, this sounds very, very cool. Danny, so overall, do you think you're going to keep reading this because it's just bite-sized horror versus like full-fledged horror stuff?
For sure. I think the cool thing about an anthology is like if you didn't click with one of the stories, you could just move on to the next one, right? There's also
Yeah, that's true.
all kinds of creative teams on it. Like, I would never have expected to see somebody like Chris Condon do something horror. Like, I guess Texas Blood is kind of
I mean,
horror.
that Texas Blood is pretty
play.
creepy.
Yeah, but seeing Jorge Fornes do art in one of these stories, that's pretty cool because I've only seen him do Batman stuff. So yeah, I definitely will stick around with this. Mainly because I don't want them to stop making anthology books like this, right? So I try to pick those up whenever I can, and of course they have a plethora of really nice covers. I did have to get this digital because I forgot this was coming out, but I'm gonna go hunt one down at the shop because there's some really cool covers out there. But Mike, how about you? How have you been? How have comic books been?
Oh, but it's been an interesting month and some change off for the show. I think the last thing we recorded was the Santos Sisters episode that I think aired last week. Paul and I chatted with Greg and Fake. Very cool, interesting conversation. Those guys are like a total blast. But yeah, so I've been just sitting in my house, just reading comics nonstop. Like I binged through the rest of Hellboy, started it on BPRD. I sat down and I read a bunch of different, like just all of my comics that I hadn't read for the past 2 months. I just sat down and read all of them because I just was like, I have to do this, got to get caught up for the show. But the big thing that I read on top of getting a whole bunch of stuff, which I guess I'll talk about a little bit later in the mail from Kickstarter and whatever it was. I read the Weatherman volume 1 through 3. I read the entire series from start to finish because it came out in like 2016, I think, is when the first series came out. So to see volume 3 just coming to the end this year, very, very exciting. And if only because I loved the Weatherman when it started. Such a cool, bizarro kind of almost too action-packed story that came to a beautiful conclusion. For those of you that don't know, this is a series by Jody Lehup with art by Nathan Fox, colors by Marino Dionisio, and letters by Steve Wands. The summary for this book, without really getting too deep into the nitty-gritty, is that in the future, a bumbling Martian weatherman finds himself in the middle of a war after he's identified as the man who essentially pulled the trigger on destroying the population of Earth. As this story unfolds, we discover the real reason no one can go back to Earth, and then some. There's so much more to this story than what I just posted or what I just said, but honestly, it is an incredible little book that is somehow still funny despite how intense the series gets. And sitting down to read this from start to finish was like having it all in one go. Was like, it felt so good. Like, it's exactly how that book should have been like delivered, but I understand like timelines and interest and yada yada yada. I'm just glad that the entire series came out, and so sitting down to read it from start to finish was like incredible. I can't wait to get this like big fat collection that I can put on my shelf so that I can go back and read it. But yeah, like I said, the intensity of this book is there from right after like the first issue. I think the first issue was very, very goofy and funny, and then it gets super intense, and the book keeps that intensity, but there are somehow still very, very, very funny, goofy, stupid moments that I really appreciate. The Weatherman character is constantly making jokes. And I guess for folks at home, when I say this guy's a Martian, he's a human who lives on Mars because of reasons in terraforming. People eventually populated Mars, and Earth is no longer accessible, in heavy quotes. But yeah, like, this book, it breaks the seriousness pretty often in a way that like is very much needed, because otherwise this would just be a very heavy book. And so I really appreciated that. There was a lot of really good twists throughout that like keep you on your toes. You don't really know that the story is going in like a really good way. So when big reveals happen, you can like go back and page through and go, oh man, some of these clues were actually here. It's very cleverly done. So I appreciated that. And yeah, I wasn't sure what I wanted out of this book when it ended, but the way that issue 7 of volume 3 wrapped up, like I was legit tearing up. Like I felt for all of the characters in the story, and the way that everything gets put together is just incredible. Nathan Fox's art is like superb from the get-go. Like, this book has such a distinct style and look. And like the way that everything can be very exaggerated and animated is like very consistent, despite this book coming out over 6 years, which I really appreciated. Not to say that artists can't evolve by any means, but the fact that this book style stayed consistent over such a long period of time is very, very cool to see. Because going back and looking at issue 7 of volume 3 to issue 1 of volume 1, you can see the same through line, and I really, really like that. And it felt consistent. Like, all of the beats and all of the action felt consistent. I like the way that this book amped itself up and built to like this almost crazy anime level ending that was really, really fun. And yeah, it's the only downside that I would say about this, really bad thing maybe, might be that the book almost feels too mean to its characters at times. Like, there are a few moments where you're like, how can anything get worse for this person? How are you still beating up on them? Like, everything has gone wrong. But in the end, all comes back, and it doesn't feel as bad. Like, there's a couple very low points in the book, but you can't feel the highs of this book until you feel the lows. So in the end, you appreciate it. But somewhere in the middle, like middle of the second half, you kind of just go, whoa, this is like almost too much. And then it finally pays itself off. So that would be the only thing I'd say to watch out for, is this book does hit some very low lows, but the high at the end is incredible. So highly recommend this to everybody. Finally, after years and years of us talking here about it on the show, I can finally say, go read all of The Weatherman. It's incredible from start to finish. It's all out there. So that's what I read, as well as a bunch of other stuff, but that's the big one. I was very excited to sit down and read this the other week. So that's me.
Yeah, I've only read the first volume of that, but I remember liking it a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
to what you were saying about how dark it can get, even in that first issue, if I remember correctly, even though
Yep.
it's mostly it's very funny, there is like a particular thing that happens in that issue that is kind of one of those things that a lot of times in like stories and movies and stuff, TV shows, there's sort of an unspoken rule of like, you never do this, and they do it in that first
Yes.
issue.
Mm-hmm.
um, So yeah, it is. There's definitely some kind of shocking moments throughout the series.
Yeah, that in particular, without spoiling it, is maybe the big like content warning about things. Yes, I don't know how to say it without just spoiling it, but
Yeah.
there's some pretty violent stuff that happens in that first issue, and the series doesn't stop the violence, but that right there might be the peak, so it's all like downhill from there after that. But I will say there is a lot of reflection on that initial moment throughout the series in a way that I don't know, I felt was circled back into a positive spin. It's very weird to say without going into full details, but I think I think you'll like it if you read the whole thing. If you get to the next two volumes, I think you'll dig it, Malachi. But hopefully you can pick it up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
I,
it's such a crazy ride, so it's very entertaining, even if it has dark moments and stuff like that.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
When I was looking at your notes, I saw Martian Weatherman, and I was just expecting a book of like, "Yep, still no atmosphere in Mars, but we'll keep you updated."
Yeah, yeah. It's just the Looney Tunes Martian man, just
Yeah,
excuse me, something like that. But anyways,
hanging out with Matt Damon growing potatoes.
hmm hmm that's the alternate comic that I'm going to pitch to DC. But before we get too deep into that, let's talk about comics that are on the top of our pile, comics that we're looking forward to reading next, whether they're new or old or just something you're trying to get off your shelf because it's been sitting there for too long. Before we get into what we're reading next, I want to shout out some of the folks that are hanging out with us on Discord today and all the folks watching us live on Twitch and YouTube. Avocado Kenobi is going to be reading I Heart Skull Crusher #5, which was almost my pick this week. Very excited for that issue. CK is going to be reading The Oddly Pedestrian Life of Christopher Chaos, a book that I, for some reason, can't bring myself to read. And Nick is going to be reading The Forged #9. I've heard so many good things about The Forged. Have you guys read this book at all?
I want to read it, and I know Nick's talked about how good it is, but I go to my shop and I'm like, I don't need to buy any more of these oversized magazine-sized
Yeah,
books.
these magazine
I'm
sized
just
books.
gonna
Yeah, yeah,
wait till it's. I know the first volume is already out,
yeah,
so I do want to check it out. My other concern is I believe this is a Greg Rucka book,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
those books they just kind of take a break sometimes, and they don't come back for a while, and that's completely understandable. But I just want to make sure there's at least like 2 volumes, and then I'll try to dig into it. So
Okay, okay. Yeah, I've heard very, very good things about it. But I guess let's bounce over to you, Malachi. What is on the top of your pile? What's the book you're looking forward to reading next?
Well, I think towards the end of August, a book called Cutting Season by Banu Brutop, I think is how it said, Prutop. Um,
Okay.
I've followed his work just like on Instagram and stuff like that. And he does these like really kind of um, they're like short comic stories. They're almost like poetry in comic form, but very kind of like twisted and dark and funny. So like beautiful, sort of very strange, deformed drawings, um, and uh, yeah, great kind of like punchy short stories that like I'm making it sound super weird, and it is definitely weird, but it's like very entertaining to read. It's very like it's like a very smooth read, I guess. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so he's been doing these short comics and just posting them online and stuff like that for a while, and so I'm really excited that Fantagraphics is releasing kind of like a nice hardcover collecting a bunch of those stories. Yeah,
Oh,
just
hell yeah.
beautiful work. I think he's kind of one of the most exciting cartoonists that has kind of new cartoonists. Nobody else is like his stuff for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at some of it right now. I understand what you mean. This is some really interesting, like just preview pages from different things or pieces of this book. I think it's it's something else. I'll just say that. That's the only way to
It's
describe it. It
wild.
is
Yeah,
something
yeah.
else.
It's like a
Yeah.
combo of like body horror and like there's definitely like very weird kind of like sexual things in it, and but like
Yeah.
uh again funny and like very poetic and
hmm
very like design oriented. Like the compositions and the panels are really interesting and cool. So yeah, I definitely recommend it to maybe anybody that has a slightly more adventurous taste in comics.
Well, I mean, that there's a Fantagraphics sale that I think goes on for like a couple more days. Maybe I'll have to try to pre-order that with a
Yeah,
sale
yeah,
code
yeah.
or something. That sounds awesome. Thanks for sending us or telling us about that. Let me talk about what I'm reading next. I'm going to be reading The Department of Truth number 24. Because of course I am. This is James Tynion, Martin Simmons. I mean, at this point, folks, if you've listened to this show, you know this is the best book that Image is publishing, that maybe anyone's publishing, as far as I'm concerned. I'm sorry, but it's the book that's always at the top of my list. I eschew all responsibilities in my life to sit down and read this comic book. I need to have it inside of my brain, inside of my blood and veins. But I don't actually want to talk about that book. What I really want to talk about is a book that I just got in the mail from Crowdfunder without an E. It's by Charles Forsman. Chelsey. Here Comes Chelsey Nooseneck is actually what it's called, but it's just big words Chelsey. This just showed up for me. He put out this book out of the blue. It's a story that is described as he's just a little guy who is kind of shy, kind of dumb, and kind of gullible. And I like that. I think that sounds fun. But paging through this a little bit, this book, it feels like a very simple like strip comic, like just something you'd see in a Sunday newspaper or whatever. But all of the little bits and pieces that I read before this, I read like the cover page and then the first comic on the second page. Everything is so much darker than you could ever imagine. And I like that. I think that's really fun. I think it's like a very simple, like styled book, but there's something kind of dark underneath all of that. So that's really interesting. I really don't know what else to expect out of this, because with strip comics you can kind of go any direction. But for folks that are watching this live or maybe this on Patreon, like this book just looks so nice. It's like printed on like newspaper paper, but like a little bit thicker than something like Santos Sisters or like you would get from an ash can or something. Just super high quality like styled book, and I'm very excited to dig into it. If only just because the book looks and feels really, really nice, and sometimes that's just something that gets you to love a comic book. So don't really know what to expect, but I'm sure it's going to be very fun and very dark in some capacity. So I don't know.
Yeah, I contributed to that crowdfunder also. I haven't gotten it in the mail
Oh,
yet,
nice.
but yeah, I
Okay.
love Chuck Forsman's comics.
Yeah.
He always has that mix of like there'll be very like heartwarming stuff. There'll be stuff that's like kind of like action, and then this like weird kind of like dark horror kind of thing also. So I'll be very interested to see how those different kind of flavors are mixed together in this like newspaper strip format.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I've read a handful of different, Forsman books over the years, like End of the Fucking World and I'm Not Okay with This. And like, those books are out there and kind of just wild, and they have moments of like a little bit of like in like light to them, but otherwise they just have like just dark anguish and depression just splattered all over them.
Yeah.
So yeah, very excited to see where this book goes. And hopefully you'll get your copy soon. Mine literally showed up in the mail I think Friday, so like hopefully yours is in transit. But Danny, what's on the top of your pile this week?
Before I get into that, Mike, I do want to say very, very interesting that you bring up a little weird book like that. And I think after this weekend, you can't discount little weird books because Pee Pee Poo Poo magazine just took an Eisner home this weekend.
I forgot. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
And I remember I was like, oh, Mike talked about this book when it first came out. And it was going up against some stuff that I really enjoyed throughout the year. So, it's very cool to see just like all sorts of books kind of getting all this kind of cool recognition. So, yeah,
That book's
definitely. If you see
great.
something online, yeah.
I know, and
Not.
that's like one of those things from Silver Sprocket that every time I
Mhm.
see it, I'm like, I just put all those in my cart next time I make an order from them.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, really quick. I know I don't mean to completely sidetrack, but Silver Sprocket is offering like a $40 a month service where you get all their books. You pay them $40 a month, and then they send you every single physical book that they publish like every month. It's crazy. Alternatively, you could do the digital subscription and get all the same books digitally. My brain is blown. We could talk about this after the show. I just like had to throw it out there. But Danny, continue. Or go ahead, Malachi. Yeah.
One more other quick thing is right now Caroline Cash, who does the Pee Pee Poo Poo comic, is also doing like a guest run on Nancy, the comic strip in the newspaper that's been going for decades. Caroline Cash is doing like I think a 3 week run of Nancy, and the ones I've seen so far are so funny. So yeah, lots of good
Awesome.
stuff from them right now.
Hell yeah. Hell
That's
yeah.
very cool. I love when like comic creators kind of delve into other things, and I'm like, wait a minute, I know you from comics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but uh, I the thing I am getting this week though is not very adventurous, but it's a lot of fun. It is another anthology book. This one is from DC Comics, the Super Pets Special Bitedentity Crisis, #1, because they love a good pun. Over at DC Comics.
Uh-huh.
Um, I love these little anthologies. They're just so much fun. Once again, they give you like an interesting look. It's all kind of based around a theme, right? In this case, it's all the super pet stuff, which it's one of my favorite things to read in DC, especially in small chunks like this. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that I want a whole run of Bat Cow, but I will read a 10-page story about Bat Cow if somebody
Right.
puts it
Right.
out there, right? Um, this one, let me give you a quick synopsis on this one. Bitewing and the Super Pets are together at last. Uh, Haley, the beloved barkout star out of Nightwing. So we met Haley. That's Nightwing's doggy. Finds herself to be a fish out of water when she arrives on the Kent farm. As our big city mutt tries to adjust to the country living, she's shocked to discover a kennel of courageous critters already waiting for her. Batwing meets the Super Pets. So like, come on, this is adding a new member to the Super Pets is it's something amazing. So this book will feature creators like Tony Fleece, who's doing Feral right now. So and you know, very well versed with writing animals, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Also Alexis Cosarano, Michael Conrad, Dan Waters, and Kyle Starks, who's doing his own story. He's doing both the writing and art. And then we'll have artists like Mike Norton, PJ Hold, Sammy Basri, and Christopher Mitten. So yeah, I go nuts whenever these come out, and I understand they're like usually $10 or so because you're getting a bunch of stories at once.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the biggest barrier of entry. But if you have the DC Infinite app, like on whatever level, and this hits the subscription, just go ahead and read those because those are a lot of fun. I also recommend these because you get to see a lot of creators that maybe are, you know, they're getting a tryout over at DC, or like maybe they're going to come into their regular rotation. So they give them a little story so that people get familiar with them. And also, when you go to a convention, you can take this book and you can get it signed by like 10 people instead of bringing 50 different books. So
That
there's
is
a
true.
there's a lot of upside. I've listen, as I get older, I don't want to carry 20,000 pounds of books in my backpack, right? So if I can narrow that down to like just 3 or 4, I'll
Wait,
definitely do that
you're telling me you don't want to be the guy that walks around a convention with a dolly or a
with a
hand
little
truck,
door.
depending on where you live, full of short boxes that you then have to like filter through when you get in line? You don't want to be that guy?
Not anymore. That was
Okay.
me maybe when I went to New York Comic Con in 2016. Um, on the way back, I had to pay the fee because I had so many books. Like my luggage was over 50 pounds, so like they charge you like an extra
Oh.
fee. Like on the way there, it wasn't that, but and I had already brought a bunch of books, so like I must have
Mm-hmm.
bought a lot more stuff too. And it was all books. I didn't buy any statues or anything. Like I was just picking up books from creators. So yeah. Um, but that's what I'm reading next, along with a bunch of other stuff that is obviously because if you look at my office right now, there's like 50 books laying around like everywhere.
Right.
So I need to
Right.
start reading them so I can put them away.
Yeah, that's part of one of the things I did as with our downtime on Sundays, and we didn't have the show for a couple weeks. I cleaned up my office. Like, you can't see it on the camera, but my library giant calyx bookshelf was overflowing with books, and so I rearranged some of them. I put probably a stack about this high of single issues actually inside of a bin. I'm so proud of myself for that, for actually bagging and boarding and putting my comics away. Like, someone give me a medal because I deserve it. So I understand. It's summertime. Sometimes you just things get a little crazy. Um, I don't know, Malachi. Do you have a comic book problem where you've got stacks of books that you have to take care of? I mean,
Yeah, yeah. I have because my wife is an illustrator. She does like greeting card illustration, has her own greeting card company, but she needs kind of
oh,
a
cool.
big space for like fulfillment and storage and stuff like that. but I have like a wall of books here, and then
Okay.
two, three big piles of stuff that's like to read stuff here, and then also
Ooh,
have like a overflow at the studio of a lot of books. So it's pretty bad. I need
gotcha.
to get rid of some for sure.
Listen, that is the thing. That's the lie we all tell ourselves is that I'm going to get rid of some of these one day. And I've got 3 boxes downstairs that I've meant to take to the library that have been sitting there for a year and a half. I get it.
Yeah, I also have about 3 boxes at the studio of like I'm definitely going to take these into a shop sometime and hand them off,
Right.
but hasn't happened yet.
Yeah,
I,
we'll
I
get
got
there.
a
We'll
quick
get
aside
there
before we
together.
get into the stuff.
Oh,
Does
sure.
your wife also get comps for her greeting card stuff? Like whenever she does an illustration on something? Like, I know you guys usually get comps on like the work that you've been doing. So I don't know if that works the same on the greeting card industry.
Well, she kind of runs everything herself, so it's not just comps.
Oh,
She has like
Ah.
the whole stock of everything. So
oh
it's
wow.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah,
cool.
yeah,
Never have to go shopping for a greeting card.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Well, I guess like get into the last half of the show here. You've got this new book coming out, or I guess the book that's been coming out for a little bit, but it's getting collected as this episode drops today on July 31st. Black Hammer the End. You work with Jeff Lemire. I guess I'm really, really curious to know what the Black Hammer world experience was. Like you came into this, Black Hammer multiple series, a couple different times in and out. I'm curious, like, how did that all get started? Like, had you been reading Black Hammer? Were you friends with Jeff Lemire? Was it an assignment purpose thing? Like, how did you get involved in the Black Hammer universe in general?
I let's see. I had been reading Black Hammer.
Okay.
When Black Hammer started, I still worked at a comic book shop, and that it was definitely one of my favorite books to read as it was coming out. Um, and let's see, I started, I think, doing like some covers here and there for Black Hammer, different Black Hammer titles. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then that went well, so the editor asked Matt and I to do a one shot, the Black Hammer Visions series they had
Yeah.
going, which was like a series of one shots. So Matt and I did illustrated Cthulhu story that was written by Cullen Bunn. Really great, uh, like fun, kind of grimy one shot story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was just kind of one thing led to another. I knew Jeff a little bit. He had done like he'd very kindly like written blurbs for like the back of one of our books and stuff like that in the past, but didn't know him too well. Yeah, it wasn't really until working with him on the book um, that we became more acquainted. Yeah.
No, that's cool. No, that's cool. Yeah, no, I remember. I think at one point art changed from another artist to your work, and I remember just being floored by some of like the 2-page layouts that you guys did because I'm really curious to know like the one page in particular that sticks out to me. Like I think in all of the Black Hammer stuff that you've worked on, there's this 2-page spread. I think near the end of Black Hammer Reborn where like Colonel Weird is essentially like losing it. His mind is like fragmented into a bunch of places. Like, how do you approach drawing such like a huge bombastic page like that? Are you drawing at like huge scale, or I guess like how do you do layouts for that? Because I just looking at it to me, it kind of messes with my head. So how do you go from like a blank page to the final product?
I mean, the dirty secret of comics is that stuff is the easy stuff.
No.
The hard stuff is the stuff that no one cares about.
Sure, sure,
Like,
sure. Okay.
like just getting a room, like the interior of a room to look like believable and have the right level of detail and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That tends to be kind of the stuff that takes the most amount of effort and time.
Okay.
So something like that spread is just kind of like that's just like cake. Like that's the really fun kind of like thing that you get to do. And one of the things that was cool about that run, I worked on that one with Matt Sheen, who I do a lot of different comic stuff with, and that was part of like a 4-issue chunk that we did, and it's just like the types of stories that you always kind of want to get as an artist, where it's like low panel count per page. But
Sure,
he's
sure.
basically asking for like all this like crazy psychedelic sci-fi stuff. So it's like all the most fun stuff to draw. Um, yeah, so for something like that, I mean, Matt and I are already kind of very immersed in a lot of the like weird science fiction pulp art and stuff like that. So it was just sort of a matter of talking over some of our favorite images that are like that. And then Matt just did incredible pencils. That our process for that was pretty similar to like the usual kind of back and forth for a mainstream comic where, yeah, Matt did pencils and then I did inks and color. I think maybe the
Mm.
only thing that was a little different is maybe I added in extra planets to kind of up the chaos of it. But
Oh, sure, yeah.
yeah, Matt just, knocked it out of the park with the pencils, so it was easy to just, do some wild colors and tighten it up and everything. But yeah, that stuff is really fun to draw.
Gotcha. Do you have like a page that sticks out? I mean, beyond that one that I mentioned, that like really was just like a whole lot of fun for you guys to do?
Um, that might have been the most fun. There,
Yes, I nailed it.
yeah, that might have been the most fun one. There's one in so that was from the Reborn run of the story, and then there's a
Yeah.
page in the last issue of The End, which is a spread of, I mean, it's a classic superhero spread where it's all the heroes of the
Yeah.
entire, world are all kind of flying out into battle. And, there are certain kind of like subgenres of superhero pages in comics, and that
Hmm.
is kind of one of the big ones. And so
Yeah.
I never worked on a superhero book before, and one of the things that was really fun, even though Black Hammer is not your normal kind of superhero book, even then it does have some of those touchstones. So it was really fun to
Oh, of
try
course.
and think of like, okay, what's my approach to this classic type of spread going to be?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so that was probably the other one that was really fun, but very time
Yeah.
consuming because it does literally have hundreds of characters on it.
I was just gonna say, like, I can't imagine that takes a little bit of time,
Yeah.
to draw. I mean, like, I'm curious about pages like that. And Danny, I promise I'll let you get in on this. I got to know all these questions. I got to have all these questions answered. But when it came to some of those like character designs, did you get a say into like how some of those characters look? Because it was, it's a slew of multiversal heroes and villains and everything all together at once. So did you get to like help design some of that stuff, or was that like directly pitched from Jeff, or some mix of both?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that it's fun to work with Jeff is because he's also an artist and not just a writer. He
For sure.
understands what it is like to be an artist and what is fun to do when you're an artist. And so
Sure.
he was never, and the editor, Daniel, were never really like hardcore about the continuity of the costumes between like runs. Like they understand that as long as it's relatively close, like they can let each artist kind of do their take on that character. So from the very start, they were never really strict about that kind of stuff. And then because this story is like a multiversal story, and there are all these variations of the characters in that final battle. Yeah, a lot of the characters are sort of like I was just kind of making up on the spot,
Hell
which for
yeah.
me is really, really fun.
Yeah.
Designing characters like that, designing variations on characters is really cool. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, I have a distinct picture of that image. I went through and skimmed through all the pages today, just to refresh myself and I was like, that page was just like, oh, this is so cool. No, that's fantastic. But Danny, your turn. Please take over. I need to stop speaking.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, luckily, a lot of the Black Hammer universe characters don't have thousands of pouches, so hopefully that makes it a little easier for you
It's
to
true.
whatever.
Yeah. They all have very like Golden Age inspired. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
how you
yeah.
know Jeff Lemire's an artist. He's like, I don't want to draw 1,000 pouches on my characters, so I don't make anyone else do the same thing. I was looking through your work and your website as well. Are there any creators or any? And it doesn't just to be just it doesn't just have to be comic book creators, but like anybody that you kind of draw inspiration or that you grabbed as an influence as you were trying to like figure out your style for comic books.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like a continual process for me. I'm never happy with my style, um, but there's lots of. I mean, so there are people kind of in the more alternative comics world or like book market comics world that's kind of how I got into comics in a serious way. So there's people like Kevin Zanga or like Charles Burns, uh, Jillian Tamaki, kind of a more recent person, Eleanor Davis. Like I love all of those cartoonists. Their books I think are all really incredible. Earlier I was holding up. We were talking about the Gianni De Luca
Yeah.
Shakespeare
Yeah.
comics. I love those. Um, More classic kind of guys like Krigstein. We were talking about EC kind of stuff, or Basil Wolverton. I love those kinds of things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
LB Cole is like a great cover artist, comic book cover artist that does these almost like blacklight style posters before there were
Oh
blacklight
yeah.
posters. But then there's also I try to draw from outside of comics as well. So there's one of my favorites right now. There's this school of kind of abstract painters called Desert Transcendentalists that were big in like kind of early mid-century. And there's this one artist, Agnes Pelton, that I really love that does these kind of really beautiful, kind of semi-abstract landscapes. Um, Other like illustrators, um, there's this guy George Alt who does these like very moody kind of like uh, suburban cityscapes and stuff like that. Edwin Georgi is a great. Uh, he was like a fashion illustrator. Um, on and on. Paul Kirchner is great. Like psychedelic. If you like psychedelic stuff, his is great. I've got Hiru Isono does these like incredible,
Oh yeah.
um,
Oh wow.
like
That
super dense,
yeah.
uh,
That's super detailed
like
stuff.
rainforest
It's
drawings. Insane, so good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, tons of stuff. I could go on forever and ever with that kind of
Sure.
thing.
I'll try to compile a list and put it in our show notes or something. But that's
Sure.
that's amazing. That's incredible.
I also wanted to ask. I was looking at your cover work, and I found it that there's like kind of three different styles of covers. There's like either a character or something that's more of a just a kind of like a bust, but it's kind of out there, and then you have like these really surreal like type of covers that you do where it's almost as if the figure is kind of deconstructing, especially with a lot of the Black Hammer stuff. And then of course you have the ones that are like just thousands of characters, right? Like there's like so many characters on a cover. So like, do you have a specific preference when you're like drawing like your covers? Like when you get an assignment, you're like, well, I can kind of do it this way or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I am always. It's gonna be more interesting to me if I can push the influences so that it is something that you're not used to seeing in on the comic book shelves. Um, so that's part of it. I think there is kind of a range because I am restless with style. I mean, there's also a part of me that likes to just really like settle into um, uh, just trying to paint like a really nice kind of classic portrait of a character. And sometimes, like say with some of the like Star Trek covers, that
Yeah.
tends to be
Yeah.
more of the venue for that kind of a thing because they just, you kind of want to hit like a little bit of a broader appeal for like Star Trek readers that maybe aren't as accustomed to seeing kind of stuff that's a little more out there. But I think within that restraint, it's really interesting to work within that restraint and try and make something that's really beautiful. And obviously, there's a long tradition of incredible illustrators that did that, so it's wide open. But yeah, I don't know. I really go back and forth with the how I feel about my own cover work.
Sure.
It's just kind of always trying to push to get better and to kind of be more
It
interesting.
depends on the day of the week and the deadline, I guess.
Yeah. No, it's definitely. I mean, I feel like a lot of your covers are really mind blowing, and it's fantastic. I mean, honestly, speaking of like designs and influences, I was really curious. I wanted to ask this since Danny we kind of talked about it for a second. So I picked up your X-Men zine. At C2E2, which is very cool. Huge X-Men fan, which is why I was like, oh, let's do this. This book is it's just a quick little zine that's just full of different. I'm showing this for folks watching live, just different costumes throughout the years. So I'm curious, are you a big X-Men fan? Are you or just a fan of the costumes, or did you what made you want to put together a little zine like this that's just like tackling these different styles of characters throughout their years?
I'm definitely an X-Men fan. Although, with something like X-Men where the world is so big, I always feel like there's no ceiling on like how obsessed someone can be with
Sure.
X-Men. So I'm like,
Yes.
I like it, but I'm hesitant to kind of claim any sort of expertise or anything like that.
Hey, that's
Um,
fine. I feel like I'm a big fan, and every day I meet people who know way more than me, like so much more that I can never fathom. So you're in good company, I promise.
right. Yeah, I like we kind of talked about with the Black Hammer stuff and like how fun it was to design alternate versions of the existing characters. That was sort of a similar impetus with the X-Men zine. I wasn't intending to make a zine out of it. I was kind of just doing it as like a cool down kind of for fun thing to like, okay, I'm gonna, try and design like a weird version of Forge's leg, um,
Yeah, sure.
stuff like that. And so it was mostly just kind of, you know, like the challenge that was fun about it was to try and take the signature elements of each character and then like make it into a more cohesive whole for the whole team so that
Mm,
there's a there's a stricter kind of design overview for the aesthetic than there usually is for the X-Men. Um, and then also it's just fun to kind of like explore character through the designs where like I was like Rogue in particular, there's always this dark side to Rogue, but it never seems like it's as dark as maybe it should be. And so like my
hmm
version of Rogue kind of hints that
was looking at that
yeah,
earlier.
that she's maybe had a rougher past than the canonical Rogue, like she's fully
Yeah,
covered, like she does not want to touch anything at all. Um
right, right.
uh yeah, so stuff like that I think is kind of fun to explore through the costumes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like it's a cool little just like I don't know. It's like a cool little book to just have and just like think about like I don't know all the many types of designs that we get. Like I feel like the X-Men of all superheroes I feel like get redone and redesigned all the time. So like this is cool to just see another take on that, which is very fun. But yeah, I mean, do you have a favorite X-Men run that you usually go to? I'm curious if how big of a fan are. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Name 3 X-Men right now.
Name the original 5 X-Men. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean,
But
I did really have a good time with the Krakoa era
ooh,
that
my heart.
recently wrapped up.
Oh,
I had a great time with that, and then I'm always like after that, it's a lot of just like there are character moments and stuff like that. There are just certain
oh,
X-Men
sure.
characters that I just love so much. Um, I'm I'm like a diehard Nightcrawler person. I'm the most maybe the like underrated one that I feel like I feel like everyone has their like X-Men that's barely been in anything, but like
Yeah.
uh I was kind of the right age where I never, when I was a kid, I didn't like collect comics. I would just kind of get random ones. But I had a
Yeah.
few that had Marrow in it. If
Oh,
you
okay.
remember Marrow, and so I like
Yeah.
really like Marrow. I feel like there could be like an incredible Marrow miniseries or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm here to talk about X-Men all day. So I mean, but I don't. But still, that's awesome. I mean, I'm a big Gambit fan, so it's always like I gotta always double explain to people. It's like no. I like Gambit, but like not in that way. You know, like he's just this cool guy, and I realize that he's who he is. Um, but yeah, no, I feel that same way. My backup is David Haller, aka Prodigy or whatever you want to call him, Charles Xavier's son. That's specifically because of a run that is behind me somewhere over here that Cy Spurrier did. That just like that whole run is just like uh, mind blowing. It's incredible. It's incredibly moving. And I love that series. So that character will always have a space in my heart. But yeah, moments in that series are very important to me. Mostly the very stupid but very powerful moment where he goes to fight Cyclops and he says, "Come at me, bro." And it's like the most stuck in time moment ever, but also perfect for the series. So like, I'll never forget that. But Danny, I got to give you a chance too. I mean, like, where are we at with you on your X-Men reading? I'm curious. Or who's your favorite character / run?
Oof. I mean, I also really enjoyed the Krakoa stuff. I think my favorite run though is from the Marvel Now era, the Wolverine and the X-Men. Like when they were in the school, I believe it was it Jason Aaron maybe doing
Yeah,
it for like
yeah,
42 issues. I love that stuff. It's so weird and bonkers and introduces so many cool characters like Kid Gladiator and the Little Brood and like all these little weird characters that
yeah.
we haven't seen in a while. So that's probably it. But I mean, we've been eating good as X Men fans. I think ever since I've been reading comics. So
That is true.
I'll always
I
check it out. Even like the Age of X Men stuff was weird, but I really enjoyed a lot of the miniseries that came out of that. And I
yeah.
discovered some of my favorite creators. So, and I'm a '90s kid, so like Jubilee is probably always gonna be my favorite.
Mm,
Followed close by Magic. So, yeah.
okay. Okay. Well, I'm very excited to see you paint that Wolverine behind you to look like Clown Wolverine, because that's a moment that I can never
Oh,
get out
I
of my head from that
love
Wolverine in the X-Men
Clown
run.
when they go to the circus. I love that. Oh,
Yeah, the circus arc is bonkers to me. I'll never forget that.
I got a little cover by a little commission by Nick Bradshaw. But I had just had him do regular Wolverine. I didn't ask him to do the clown version. So, but yeah, I love that cover.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, I guess Danny, any last questions? I guess before we wrap up here, I realize we're like about to hit time for what I promised everybody. So, anything last things you want to ask?
No, I don't really have anything. I do want to say, like, I love I love following artists that they post. They're like, here's a cool down sketch, and I'm like, oh, that looks so good. Like, how's that just a cool down sketch? Like, I don't understand what this cool down entails, but it looks so good and completed and thorough. So the fact that you put a little zine out of that, like, that's just it's kind of mind blowing. But yeah, I love seeing that. Like when they post on online, like here's a cooldown. Like okay, well, it looks super cool. So I guess that's what you mean by cooldown.
Yeah, well, I guess I want to say thanks for joining the show today, Malachi. This has been super great for folks that are interested in following your stuff and checking out everything you've got going on after Black Hammer: The End. Where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, I'm just Malachi Ward on Instagram and Twitter and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there aren't that many Malachi Wards, so it's pretty easy to track me down.
Yeah, I gotcha. I definitely understand. Yeah, we'll make sure to put all that stuff in the show notes. Everybody out there should go check out Black Hammer: The End. Look for anything that Malachi's name is on because it's going to be fantastic. I assure you, folks. I'm saying that, not you. You can Yeah, that's all. But I'll say thank you guys for listening this week. Thank you to everyone watching live on Twitch and on YouTube. If you're listening to this on the 31st, go pick up a copy of Black Hammer. Thank you to Nick for proof listening. Next week's show is going to be Paul, Brian, and Zach while I'm at Gen Con, playing a lot of tabletop games and hopefully shaking hands with Kieran Gillen and thanking him for creating the Die RPG because he's supposed to be there. So that's the plan. But I say thank you again for everybody for listening. And until next time, comic books are good, and so are you.